The barking should have been the first warning sign. Officer Doug Martinez stood frozen at gate 47, staring at the Belgian Malinois who had never disobeyed him in 6 years of flawless service. Scarr's body was rigid, locked onto the pregnant woman with shopping bags scattered at her feet, and all Doug could hear was his own breathing going shallow, the same rhythm that had carried him through 1,000 security threats. What happened in the next 8 minutes would transform everything he thought he knew about his partner. The behavior he mistook for a false alert would reveal capabilities that even veteran canine trainers had never documented. But in that moment, with his supervisor's voice cutting through the terminal chaos and the woman's flight boarding in 15 minutes, Doug had no idea he was about to choose between his career and 2 lives that hung in a balance no scanner could detect. Scarr's eyes locked onto Doug's, not aggressive but desperate. The intensity radiating from his partner was unlike anything in their decorated history. Not the coiled readiness before a takedown, not the focused alertness of a bomb detection. This was something raw, something primal. The pregnant woman's face had gone pale as printer paper. One hand braced against the security checkpoint, the other pressed protectively against her rounded belly. Around them, the terminal's fluorescent light seemed too bright, the crowd's murmurs too loud, and time itself compressed into the impossible choice Doug would have to make in the next 30 seconds. Doug Martinez had learned to read airports the way other people read books. After 6 years patrolling the international terminal with Scarr at his side, he could spot the nervous first-time flyer from 50 feet away, distinguish between jet lag and genuine distress with a single glance, and predict crowd flow patterns before the morning rush even began. The holiday season had turned the terminal into a river of humanity, families hauling oversized luggage and last-minute gift bags, business travelers checking their watches every 30 seconds, the air thick with the competing scents of coffee, cinnamon rolls, and barely contained stress. Scarr moved beside him with the same fluid precision that had earned them 3 commendations and a perfect service record. The Belgian Malinois was 70 pounds of muscle and focus, his tan and black coat gleaming under the terminal's fluorescent lights. They'd been partners since Scarr was 18 months old, fresh out of detection training and eager to prove himself. Now, at 7 years old, Scarr was at the peak of his abilities, calm, confident, and utterly reliable. The morning screening proceeded with mechanical efficiency. A businessman in a rumpled suit passed through without incident, his laptop bag and carry-on containing nothing more interesting than protein bars and phone chargers. An elderly couple shuffled past with matching floral luggage, their patience tested by the security line, but their kindness evident in how they thanked each TSA agent. A family with 3 young children created momentary chaos with forgotten water bottles and stuffed animals that needed separate screening. But Scarr merely sat and watched, tail giving a single wag when the youngest child waved at him. Then Tanya Morrison approached Gate 47's checkpoint. She was perhaps 30 years old, her blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail, wearing a gray dress that accommodated her obviously pregnant belly. She carried a small rolling suitcase in one hand and 2 shopping bags in the other, moving with the determined efficiency of someone who'd cut their timing close. Her boarding pass was already pulled up on her phone, ready to scan. Scarr's transformation happened in an instant. One moment, he was the calm professional Doug had worked beside for 6 years. The next, every muscle in the dog's body went rigid. His head snapped toward Tanya with laser focus, ears forward, body lowering slightly into a stance Doug had only seen when Scarr detected explosives or narcotics. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. "Scarr, heel," Doug commanded, his voice firm but calm. It was a command Scarr had obeyed 10,000 times. Scarr didn't move. The growl intensified, and then Scarr began barking. Not the alert bark Doug knew, but something more urgent, more desperate. The dog lunged forward against his lead with such force that Doug's shoulder jerked, his boots sliding slightly on the polished floor. "Scarr, down, now!" Doug tried again, adding the hand signal they'd drilled countless times. Nothing. Scarr pulled harder, his barking echoing off the terminal's high ceilings, drawing stares from hundreds of travelers. Tanya froze mid-step, her eyes going wide with shock. The shopping bags slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with soft thuds. Her free hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective and frightened. I haven't done anything," she stammered, her voice barely audible over Scarr's frantic barking. "Please, I just need to catch my flight." Doug's mind raced through the possibilities, training kicking in even as confusion flooded through him. Explosive residue? But Scarr's posture was wrong for that. Narcotics? Impossible. The stance was different, and Tanya didn't fit any profile. Concealed weapon? No, Scarr would have alerted differently. This was something else entirely, something Doug had never seen in 6 years of perfect partnership. Scarr continued barking, pulling with such desperate intensity that Doug had to brace himself, and in the dog's eyes, those intelligent brown eyes that had never lied to him, Doug saw something that made his blood run cold. Not aggression, not a threat response. Urgency, pleading, fear. Scarr wasn't trying to protect Doug from Tanya. He was trying to protect Tanya from something Doug couldn't see. Doug cycled through every command in their arsenal, his voice growing more insistent with each failed attempt. "Scarr, release! Release!" He added the sharp hand signal that meant immediate disengagement, the one they'd practiced until it became muscle memory. Scarr's eyes flicked to him for a fraction of a second, acknowledgement without obedience, before returning to Tanya with that same desperate intensity. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong," Tanya said again, her voice trembling now. She'd backed up against the security checkpoint table, one hand still pressed to her rounded belly. "I just need to catch my flight. I have my boarding pass, my ID, everything's in order." A crowd was forming. Doug could see it in his peripheral vision, that dangerous clustering of curious travelers pulling out cell phones, recording everything. A woman in a business suit murmured to her companion. A teenager held up his phone, probably already live streaming. The situation was spiraling from a contained incident into a public spectacle with every passing second. "Martinez?" Officer Jackson appeared at Doug's left, his hand moving instinctively toward the radio on his belt. "What the hell is going on? Get your dog under control!" "I'm trying," Doug said through gritted teeth, pulling back on Scarr's lead. The dog barely registered the pressure. At 70 pounds, Scarr wasn't large enough to drag Doug across the terminal, but the force of his determination was palpable. "He's not responding to any commands." Another officer approached from the right. "Sir, you need to step back with the canine. Now, you're creating a disturbance." Doug's mind churned through possibilities, searching for an explanation that made sense. In 6 years, Scarr had never disobeyed. Not once. Not when distracted by food, not when startled by loud noises, not even that time a cat had darted across their path during training. Scarr's obedience was absolute. Until now. The barking shifted in pitch, becoming more frantic. Scarr lunged forward again, and this time Doug noticed something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Scarr wasn't baring his teeth, his hackles weren't raised. The posture was all wrong for a threat alert. His body language screamed urgency, not aggression. It was the same desperate energy Doug had seen once before, when Scarr had discovered a lost child hiding in a maintenance closet, hypothermic and unresponsive. This wasn't detection, this was desperation. "Please, officer," Tanya's voice cracked. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the terminal's air conditioning. "My flight boards in 15 minutes. My mother is waiting for me in Phoenix. I'm supposed to stay with her until the baby comes. Please, I need to go." The crowd pressed closer. Doug heard fragments of conversation. "Is she a terrorist? Why won't the dog stop? Someone's going to get hurt." Each voice adding to the pressure building in his skull. Then Supervisor Rebecca Chen cut through the crowd like a blade, her expression carved from granite. "Officer Martinez," her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, "remove the canine from the checkpoint immediately. This is a direct order." Doug's training screamed at him to comply. Chain of command, protocol, following orders was the foundation of everything he'd built his career on. But Scarr's frantic barking filled his ears, and when Doug looked down at his partner who had never been wrong, who had saved lives, who trusted Doug with his own life every single day, he saw something in those brown eyes that made his decision crystallize. Scarr was begging him. "Ma'am," I heard myself say, his mouth moving before his brain fully caught up, "I think something's wrong, medically wrong." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "That's not your determination to make, officer. Remove the canine now." Tanya swayed slightly, catching herself against the table. Her face had gone pale, Doug realized. When had that happened? And the way she was breathing, shallow, controlled, like someone managing pain they didn't want to acknowledge. "My mother," Tanya whispered, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "I promised her. She's been so worried." Doug stood at the intersection of duty and instinct, knowing that whatever he chose in the next 5 seconds would define everything that came after. Scarr howled. "Ma'am," Doug said, his voice cutting through the chaos with forced calm. "How are you feeling right now? Any discomfort? Any pain?" Rebecca shot him a look that promised consequences, but Doug kept his eyes on Tanya, watching for something he couldn't name but desperately needed to find. "I'm fine," Tanya said automatically, the response coming too quickly, practiced. "Just tired. It's been a long pregnancy, but I'm okay. Really, I just want to catch my flight." But she wasn't fine. Doug could see it now that he was looking, really looking past the obvious pregnancy and the nervous smile. Her skin had a waxy quality under the terminal's harsh lighting, pale in a way that went beyond simple fatigue. A fine sheen of sweat covered her forehead and upper lip despite the aggressive air conditioning that kept the terminal at a constant 68 degrees. Her breathing remained shallow, controlled. And the way she held her abdomen. Doug had seen plenty of pregnant women touch their bellies, gentle, unconscious gestures of connection with the life growing inside. But Tanya's hand pressed against her side with tension in every finger, not caressing, but bracing, as if holding something together that threatened to come apart. Scarr's barking had shifted again, becoming rhythmic, insistent. The dog's eyes never left Tanya's midsection. A memory surfaced, unbidden. 3 months ago, Doug had been channel surfing during a rare evening off when he'd landed on a news segment about service dogs. The reporter had interviewed a woman with diabetes whose golden retriever could detect drops in her blood sugar before she felt symptoms. The dog had saved her life twice, the woman said, alerting to chemical changes in her scent that even medical equipment might miss. Dogs' noses, the expert explained, could detect parts per trillion, cancer, seizures, even pregnancy complications in some documented cases. Doug's heart began hammering against his ribs. "Martinez," Rebecca's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Last warning, remove the canine or I'm calling this in to command. You'll be suspended before lunch." Doug looked down at Scarr. The dog's barking had faded to a desperate whine, but his body remained rigid with purpose. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Doug saw 6 years of partnership compressed into a single point of understanding. Every morning patrol, every successful detection, every moment of perfect trust. Scarr had found the explosive device hidden in a gym bag at Terminal C. Scarr had alerted to the teenager carrying fentanyl in a hollowed-out book. Scarr had located the missing child in the maintenance closet when everyone else had given up. In 6 years, Scarr had never been wrong, not once. The calculations ran through Doug's mind with crystalline clarity. If he was right, if Scarr had detected something medical, something urgent, then every second mattered. But if he was wrong, if he defied direct orders based on nothing more than a hunch and a dog's unexplained behavior, his career was over. 20 years of service, 3 commendations, a spotless record, all gone. Tanya swayed again, more pronounced this time. Her free hand shot out to grip the security table, knuckles going white. For just a moment, her practiced smile faltered, and Doug saw fear cross her face before she pushed it down, buried it under layers of determination and denial. "My mother," she whispered. "She needs me." But you need help, Doug thought, and suddenly the choice wasn't a choice at all. "Get me a paramedic," Doug said, his voice ringing with authority he didn't feel. He looked directly at Rebecca, watching her face harden with fury. "Now, I need medical personnel at gate 47 immediately." "Martinez, you are directly disobeying." "Ma'am, with all due respect, something is medically wrong with this woman, and my canine is trying to tell me that." Doug's hand tightened on Scarr's lead. The barking had stopped the moment Doug made the call, replaced by an expectant silence. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm requesting emergency medical assistance." Rebecca's jaw clenched, her hand moving to her radio. "You better be right about this, officer, because if you're not, you're done." Doug nodded, accepting the terms. He kept his eyes on Tanya, watching her face grow paler by the second, and prayed that 6 years of trusting Scarr wouldn't fail him now. Rebecca's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Are you disobeying a direct order, Officer Martinez?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Around them, the crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, cell phones held high, capturing every word. Doug could feel the weight of their collective stare, could hear the murmurs rippling through the terminal. This moment would define him, one way or another. "I'm trusting my partner, ma'am," Doug said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Something is medically wrong with this woman. I'm certain of it." "I'm fine." Tanya's protest came out sharp, edged with panic. She pushed away from the security table, standing straighter as if to prove her point. "I have a doctor. I've been monitored throughout my entire pregnancy. I've had all my checkups, all my tests. Everything has been normal. Please, just let me go. My flight is going to wait." Rebecca cut in, but her expression had shifted from pure fury to something more complicated. She pulled her radio to her lips. "This is Supervisor Chen at Gate 47. Patch me through to Commander Walsh, now." The crowd's reaction fractured like broken glass. A woman near the front called out, "Let her through, she's obviously fine." An elderly man shook his head, muttering about government overreach. But Doug also heard voices of support, a nurse identifying herself, saying the officer might be right to be cautious, a father holding his daughter's hand, telling his wife that the dog knew something. Jackson moved closer to Doug, his voice low. "Man, you better know what you're doing. Chen's calling the commander. This is going to blow up fast." Doug knew. He could already see the next 12 hours unfolding in his mind. The formal investigation, the suspension pending review, the potential termination. 20 years of service, gone. His pension, questionable. His reputation destroyed if he was wrong. Sarah would be furious. His daughter would be humiliated at school. Everything he'd worked for, betting on a dog's behavior he couldn't explain. But Scarr remained locked onto Tanya with unwavering focus. The barking had stopped, replaced by a high, anxious whine that Doug had only heard once before, when Scarr had found that hypothermic child, unresponsive and barely breathing. It was the sound of a dog who knew death was close and was desperately trying to prevent it. Doug watched Tanya take a step toward her dropped shopping bags, watched her body list slightly to the left before she caught herself, her hand shooting out to grip the edge of the security table again. The movement was subtle, easily dismissed as a pregnant woman's normal loss of balance, but combined with everything else, the pallor, the sweat, the shallow breathing, the way she held her abdomen, it formed a pattern Doug couldn't ignore. "Ma'am," he said, gently, moving slightly closer while keeping Scarr on a tight lead, "when did you last feel the baby move?" Tanya blinked, thrown by the question. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, fingers spreading across the gray fabric of her dress. "This morning," she said, but uncertainty flickered across her face. "I think it's been busy. I had to pack, catch the shuttle, get through security. I haven't really been paying attention." "But definitely this morning?" Doug pressed. Tanya's eyes went distant, searching her memory. The pause stretched too long. "I must have. I always do. Maybe I just didn't notice because—" The distant wail of sirens cut through the terminal's ambient noise. Doug saw the crowd part as two paramedics pushed through, one pulling a wheelchair, the other carrying a large red medical kit. "Martinez?" the lead paramedic said. A compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and efficient movements assessed the scene in seconds. "What have we got?" "Pregnant woman, approximately 8 months, appears distressed, pale, sweating despite cool environment. My canine has been alerting on her for the past 8 minutes. Unusual behavior. She reports decreased fetal movement." The paramedic's expression shifted instantly from skepticism to focused concern. She turned to Tanya with professional warmth. "Ma'am, I'm Sarah Rodriguez with Airport Medical Services. I'd like to check you out just to be safe. Would you mind sitting down for me?" "No!" Tanya's voice cracked. "No, I'm fine. This is ridiculous. My flight boards in 10 minutes. I'm not sitting down. I'm not going anywhere except to gate 47. She took a step forward. Her legs buckled. Doug lunged forward, but Sarah Rodriguez was faster. The paramedic caught Tanya under her arms, guiding her descent into the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. Tanya struggled against the support, trying to push herself back up even as her body betrayed her. "Ma'am, please stay seated," Sarah said firmly. Her partner, a young man with close-cropped hair, had already dropped to one knee beside the wheelchair, pulling out a blood pressure cuff and pulse oximeter. "What's the actual emergency here?" Sarah asked, looking up at Doug with barely concealed skepticism. "Sir, I need specifics. What symptoms has she presented?" Doug's mouth felt dry. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I don't know exactly, but something is wrong. My canine has been trained to detect threats and explosives, and he's never acted like this around a civilian. Never." Sarah's eyebrows rose, but she turned her attention to Tanya, who was still trying to stand. "Ma'am, I need you to stay in the chair. Can you tell me your name?" "Tanya Morrison," she said, her words coming fast, desperate. "And I'm telling you I'm fine. This is all a misunderstanding. I need to catch Flight 847 to Phoenix. My mother is waiting. She's 82 years old, and she's been worried sick about me traveling this late in my pregnancy. And if I miss this flight, she'll—" "When is your due date?" Sarah's partner asked, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around Tanya's arm. 4 weeks, March 15th. Tanya's hand gripped the armrest of the wheelchair. "Please, I've had a perfectly healthy pregnancy. My doctor cleared me to fly. I have the paperwork in my bag. I can show you." "Any cramping? Any bleeding?" "No, I told you I'm—" Tanya tried to stand again, pushing against the paramedic's gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "I'm perfectly fine. This officer and his dog have made a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to go home." The crowd had pressed closer, forming a tight semicircle around the unfolding drama. Doug heard someone recording a video narration. "Pregnant woman being detained by police at airport security." The words felt wrong, accusatory, but he couldn't process them. His entire focus remained on Tanya's face, watching the color drain further, watching the way her breathing had become more labored. "BP is 90/60, the male paramedic said quietly. "Pulse 120. Sarah's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, those numbers are concerning. I'd really like to—" "No!" Tanya shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. My mother had a stroke last year. She's alone. She needs me. I promised her I'd be there before the baby came. I promised. You can't—" Her voice cut off mid-sentence. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in crystal clarity. Doug saw Tanya's eyes widen, saw the exact instant when confusion replaced determination. Then her eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and her body went slack in the wheelchair. "Patient's unresponsive," Sarah shouted. Doug reached for Tanya, but the paramedics were already moving with synchronized urgency. Sarah tilted Tanya's head back, checking her airway, while her partner grabbed the medical kit. The crowd erupted in gasps and screams. Someone yelled for security. A woman near the back shouted that the police had caused this. And then Doug felt it, the absence of tension on Scarr's lead. He looked down. Scarr had stopped pulling. The dog sat perfectly still, his body finally relaxed, watching the paramedics work with calm, alert eyes. The desperate urgency that had defined his behavior for the past 11 minutes had vanished completely, replaced by something Doug could only describe as satisfied vigilance. Scarr had done his job. Now he was watching humans do theirs. The realization hit Doug like a physical blow. If he'd obeyed orders, if he'd removed Scarr from the checkpoint, if he'd let Tanya board that flight. "Pulse is weak and thready," the male paramedic said, his fingers pressed to Tanya's neck. "Respirations are rapid and shallow." Sarah's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, those numbers are concerning. I'd really like to—" "No," Tanya shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. My mother had a stroke last year. She's alone. She needs me. I promised her I'd be there before the baby came. I promised. You can't." Her voice cut off mid-sentence. The ambulance screamed through downtown traffic, lights strobing red and blue against glass towers. Doug had insisted on following, leaving his patrol vehicle in the airport lot and climbing into Rebecca's SUV before she could protest. She'd said nothing during the 20-minute drive to Mercy General, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her silence somehow more damning than any reprimand. Scarr sat in the back seat, calm and alert, watching the city blur past. They'd barely reached the emergency entrance when the ambulance doors flew open and a trauma team descended. Doug caught a glimpse of Tanya on the gurney, an oxygen mask over her face, IV lines snaking from both arms. Sarah Rodriguez was still doing chest compressions as they rolled her through automatic doors that read, "Authorized personnel only." "Wait here," Rebecca had said, finally breaking her silence. "I need your statement. Everything that happened from the moment Scarr first alerted." Doug recounted it all in the sterile waiting room, his voice mechanical, while Rebecca recorded everything on her phone. The initial alert, the failed commands, his decision to call for medical assistance despite direct orders. Every detail felt both vitally important and utterly inadequate to capture what had actually transpired. "You understand the position you've put me in," Rebecca said, when he finished. She looked older than she had an hour ago, the lines around her eyes deeper. "Commander Walsh is expecting a full report. There will be an investigation." "I understand, ma'am. You defied a direct order." "Yes, ma'am. You could lose your job." Doug looked down at Scarr, who gazed back with those steady, knowing eyes. "I know." Rebecca stood, tucking her phone away. She paused at the waiting room door, her back to Doug. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I hope you're right." Then she was gone, leaving Doug alone with his partner and his thoughts. The waiting room clock ticked toward 8:30 a.m. Somewhere beyond those locked doors, doctors were fighting for 2 lives. Doug's mind kept replaying the scene in agonizing detail, kept circling back to the same horrifying question: what if he'd followed orders? Tanya would have boarded Flight 847. She would have buckled into seat 23A, probably by the window so she could stretch her legs. The plane would have taxied, lifted off, climbed to 35,000 feet, and then what? Would she have collapsed in the aisle? Would cabin pressure changes have accelerated whatever was bleeding inside her? How long would it have taken to realize something was catastrophically wrong, and what could anyone have done at cruising altitude, miles from the nearest hospital? The door to the surgical wing opened. A doctor emerged, still in scrubs, surgical cap pushed back on her head. Dr. Patricia Okoye, her name badge read. She scanned the waiting room, her eyes landing on Doug with the kind of intensity that made his stomach drop. Officer Martinez? Doug stood so fast he nearly tripped over Scarr's leash. Yes? How is she? Dr. Okoye's expression was difficult to read, exhaustion mixed with something that might have been relief. She's stable. We performed an emergency cesarean section, placental abruption with severe internal bleeding. The medical terms washed over Doug, but he grasped their meaning. The baby? Baby girl, 4 pounds 3 ounces, premature but breathing on her own. NICU team is with her now. Dr. Okoye moved closer, lowering her voice. Officer, I need you to understand something. Another 20 minutes, maybe 30 at most, and we would have lost both of them. The abruption was catastrophic. She was bleeding internally at a rate that... She trailed off, shaking her head. If she'd been on that flight when this fully manifested, at altitude, with the cabin pressure changes... She didn't need to finish. Doug could see it in her eyes, the understanding of how close they'd come to a tragedy that would have made national news. Pregnant woman dies on flight, emergency landing too late, investigation into why warning signs were missed. How did you know? Dr. Okoye asked. The paramedics said she was insisting she felt fine. What made you call for help? Doug looked down at Scarr, who sat perfectly still, tail giving a single wag. I didn't know. He did. The surgical wing door opened again, and Doug heard familiar voices. Jackson appeared first, followed by 3 other canine handlers from the airport unit, their dogs at their sides. They'd come off shift, still in uniform, looking at Doug with expressions that mixed concern and confusion and something like awe. Man, Jackson said, gripping Doug's shoulder, everyone's talking about what happened. How did Scarr know? What did he detect? Doug shook his head slowly. The question had been echoing in his mind for the past hour, and he still had no answer that made sense. I don't know how he knew, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. He just knew. He reached down and ran his hand over Scarr's head. The dog leaned into the touch, accepting the praise he'd more than earned, and Doug realized he was crying. By 8:45 a.m., the chaos had crystallized into a different kind of reality. Dr. Okoye had returned with more details. The baby girl, premature but fierce, was holding steady in the NICU. 4 pounds 3 ounces of determination, the neonatologist had called her. Tanya had made it through surgery and was being moved to recovery. The bleeding had been controlled. Against odds that Doug didn't want to contemplate too closely, both mother and daughter were alive. A woman arrived just before 9 o'clock, silver-haired and moving with the desperate speed of someone who'd been traveling on pure adrenaline. She burst through the waiting room doors, her eyes wild with fear, and Doug knew immediately this was Tanya's mother. Tanya Morrison, she gasped at the nurse's station. My daughter, she was brought in by ambulance. Please, I need to... The nurse guided her back with gentle efficiency, and Doug caught the moment when relief hit her, the way her knees buckled slightly, the way she covered her mouth with both hands. They're alive? He heard her whisper. Both of them? Both stable, ma'am. The woman turned, scanning the waiting room until her eyes landed on Doug and Scarr. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, and before Doug could stand, she'd taken his hands in hers. You're the officer, she said, tears streaming down her face. The one with the dog. The nurse told me. You saved them. You saved my girls. Doug didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight. Ma'am, Thank you. She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. Thank you for not letting her get on that plane. An hour later, a nurse emerged to tell Doug that Tanya was awake and asking for him. He hadn't expected that, hadn't expected to be allowed past the restricted recovery area, but apparently Tanya had been insistent. The nurse led them down sterile hallways that smelled of antiseptic and hope, stopping at a room where machines beeped softly and light filtered through half-closed blinds. Tanya lay propped against pillows, an IV still in her arm, her face pale but alive. When she saw Doug, her eyes filled with tears. "Your dog saved my life," she said, her voice rough from intubation. "Saved my baby's life." Doug moved closer, Scarr walking calmly at his side. The dog showed no agitation now, no urgency. Whatever he'd detected was gone, resolved by the surgeon's skilled hands. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." A weak smile crossed her face. "But grateful, so grateful." Her hand moved to her abdomen, now flat beneath the hospital gown. "They told me what happened. Placental abruption. I didn't even know what that was before today." Dr. Okoye had followed them in, her curiosity evident. "We're still trying to understand how your canine detected the emergency," she said to Doug. "I've been reading case studies. There are documented instances of dogs detecting medical conditions, diabetic alerts, seizures, even some cancers. But this," she looked at Scarr with frank amazement. "He likely detected chemical changes in your scent," she explained to Tanya. "When the placenta began separating, your body would have released stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. Your blood chemistry was changing in ways imperceptible to humans. Dogs have approximately 300 million scent receptors. Humans have about 6 million. Scarr can detect parts per trillion, chemical signatures we have no ability to perceive." "But he wasn't trained for medical detection," Tanya said, looking at Scarr with wonder. "How did he know what it meant?" "Instinct," said Doug simply. "He recognized danger even without training for it. He knew something was wrong and he refused to let me ignore it." Tanya's hand moved to cover her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. "I'd been having pains," she whispered, "since yesterday afternoon. Sharp pains in my side. But I thought it was just normal pregnancy discomfort. Braxton Hicks contractions, maybe. I had so much to do, packing, getting to the airport, making sure I had everything for the trip. My mother needed me." Her voice broke. "So I ignored it. I told myself I was fine because I needed to be fine." I understood that impulse, had seen it countless times in years of service. People ignoring their body's warning signs because acknowledging them meant disrupting plans, admitting vulnerability, accepting that they weren't invincible. Sometimes we don't know what we need until someone shows us. Scarr moved closer to the bed, and Tanya reached down to rest her hand on his head. The dog accepted the touch with calm dignity, his tail giving a slow wag. In that moment, Doug saw the full circle of what had happened: a dog who couldn't speak, a woman who wouldn't listen to her own body, and a man who chose trust over protocol. "What's her name?" Doug asked. "Your daughter." Tanya smiled through her tears. "Grace," she said. "I'm naming her Grace." The investigation began 48 hours after the incident, conducted with the bureaucratic thoroughness that Doug had expected. Commander Walsh convened a review committee consisting of airport security supervisors, legal counsel, and 2 senior canine handlers from other jurisdictions. Doug sat across from them in a windowless conference room, Scarr at his feet, and recounted the events at Gate 47 for the 3rd time in as many days. "You understand that you directly disobeyed Supervisor Chen's order to remove your canine from the checkpoint?" Commander Walsh said, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the incident report. "Yes, sir." "You called for medical assistance without any clear medical symptoms presenting themselves." "That's correct, sir." "On what basis did you make that determination?" Doug looked down at Scarr. The dog gazed back calmly, unaware that his future, and Doug's, hung on how this committee interpreted one moment of defiance. "My partner's behavior, sir. In 6 years, he's never been wrong." The committee reviewed everything. Tanya's medical records, subpoenaed with her permission, showed no prior indication of complications. Dr. Okoye's testimony described the severity of the placental abruption and provided her professional opinion that without immediate intervention, both mother and child would have died. The airport security footage was played and replayed, showing Scarr's unprecedented agitation, Doug's visible struggle, and the moment when Tanya collapsed. Rebecca Chen's statement was perhaps the most surprising. Officer Martinez made a judgment call under extreme pressure, she'd written. While his defiance of direct orders cannot be overlooked, the outcome speaks to the validity of his instincts. I support no disciplinary action. The committee has reached a decision, he said finally. Officer Martinez, your actions were technically insubordinate. However, given the circumstances and the outcome, we find that disciplinary action is unwarranted. Your judgment, while unorthodox, saved 2 lives. This incident will be noted in your file as a commendation, not a reprimand. Doug felt something unclench in his chest. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Walsh said dryly. You're about to become very famous and you're not going to enjoy it. The commander was right. The cell phone video from the airport had gone viral within days, 20 million views and climbing. Police Canine's instinct saves pregnant woman became the headline that launched 1,000 think pieces. News crews requested interviews. Morning shows wanted Doug and Scarr to appear. Social media exploded with debates about police dogs, medical detection, and whether Doug was a hero or simply an officer who got lucky. Doug declined most interview requests, but the story took on a life of its own. Airport security protocols across the nation were suddenly under review. How should personnel handle situations where canines displayed unusual behavior? What training should be implemented for recognizing medical emergencies versus security threats? The Federal Aviation Administration launched a study examining in-flight medical emergencies and whether ground-level intervention protocols needed updating. More interesting to Doug were the veterinarian specialists who wanted to study Scarr. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Rebecca Chen, was a researcher at the University of California who specialized in canine olfactory capabilities. She spent 3 days at the airport conducting tests, analyzing Scarr's responses to various scent markers, trying to understand exactly what he'd detected. Dogs possess olfactory abilities we're only beginning to understand, she explained to Doug while Scarr performed scent discrimination exercises. When Miss Morrison's placenta began separating, her body underwent catastrophic chemical changes. Stress hormones flooded her system. Her blood chemistry shifted. To a dog's nose, she would have smelled like distress, like danger, like something fundamentally wrong. So he knew she was dying? He knew something was critically wrong, yes, and his instinct, his drive to protect, overrode his training. She looked at Scarr with undisguised admiration. He's remarkable. The research led to a proposal that spread through canine units nationwide. Basic medical emergency recognition training. Not to replace medical professionals, but to give canine officers another tool in their arsenal. If dogs could be trained to distinguish between standard security threats and potential medical crises, how many lives might be saved? Doug watched the proposal work its way through committees and pilot programs, watched Scarr become a case study in canine capabilities, and realized that one morning at Gate 47 had changed not just 2 lives, it had changed how people understood the bond between handler and dog, between training and instinct, between following orders and trusting your partner when every rule said not to. 6 months later, Tanya Morrison walked through the same terminal where she'd almost died, but this time she carried something infinitely more precious than shopping bags and boarding passes. Doug saw her coming from 50 yards away, recognized her immediately despite the radical difference in her appearance. She looked healthy now, vibrant, her face glowing with the particular radiance of a mother who'd been given a second chance. The baby carrier she held close to her chest contained a tiny bundle wrapped in soft yellow blankets. Rebecca Chen had arranged this meeting, clearing a quiet corner near Gate 47 where they could talk without the crush of holiday travelers. It was early December again, almost exactly 6 months since that morning, and the terminal was once again decorated with wreaths and garlands and the promise of people going home. "Officer Martinez," Tanya said, her voice thick with emotion as she approached. "And Scarr." "Miss Morrison." Doug extended his hand, but Tanya bypassed it entirely, pulling him into a brief, fierce hug that conveyed everything words couldn't. "This is Emma Grace," she said, stepping back and adjusting the carrier so Doug could see the baby's face. "Grace, because that's what you gave us, a second chance, an undeserved gift." Emma was beautiful, round-cheeked and alert, her eyes the same deep blue as her mother's. She studied Doug with the serious concentration of someone trying to understand this strange new world she'd entered 4 weeks early. At 6 months old, she was thriving, Tanya explained, meeting all her milestones, perfect in every way that mattered. Scarr moved closer, his approach gentle and measured. Doug watched as his partner sniffed the air around the baby, tail wagging slowly, and something in the dog's posture spoke of satisfaction. Whatever he detected that morning in July, whatever wrongness had driven him to break every rule, was gone now. This was how it was supposed to be: mother healthy, baby safe, the crisis averted. "She's perfect," Doug said softly. Tanya's eyes welled with tears. "Because of him, because of you both." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I've been speaking at hospitals, prenatal health awareness programs. I tell my story to pregnant women, how I ignored the warning signs, how I convinced myself the pain was normal, how I almost lost everything because I didn't want to be inconvenient." Her voice strengthened. "If my story can help even one woman recognize the symptoms I missed, then maybe something good came from how close we came to tragedy." Doug had heard about her advocacy work from the news coverage. Tanya had become a voice for listening to your body, for seeking help without shame, for understanding that ignoring symptoms could cost everything. "And you?" Tanya asked. "I heard about the training program." Doug smiled. "We're training K9 handlers to recognize when their dogs are alerting to something beyond their standard detection work, teaching them to trust their partner's instincts even when it doesn't make immediate sense." He looked down at Scarr. "We're training them to find what we're afraid of, explosives, narcotics, weapons. But that day, Scarr found what we didn't know to look for. We're trying to teach other handlers to recognize that possibility." The pilot program had exceeded expectations. 3 K9 teams across the country were now training specifically in medical emergency detection. Scarr himself had become a case study, his behavior that morning analyzed and broken down into recognizable patterns that other dogs might display in similar circumstances. They talked for 20 minutes, catching up on the past 6 months, sharing stories of recovery and change and growth. Emma fell asleep in her carrier, lulled by the gentle rumble of voices and the warmth of her mother's heartbeat. Eventually, Tanya needed to leave. Her mother was waiting outside, ready to drive them home. "Thank you," Tanya said one more time, kneeling down to Scarr's level. She let the dog sniff Emma one last time, then gently scratched behind his ears. "You're a good boy, the very best boy." After they left, Doug and Scarr returned to their patrol route. They walked the same corridors they'd walked 1,000 times before, past the same gates and security checkpoints and crowds of travelers rushing towards their destinations. But something had shifted in how Doug watched his partner. He paid attention now to the subtle changes in Scarr's body language, the nuances he might have missed before. He trusted the connection between them in ways that went beyond commands and obedience. Their bond had deepened not by following rules, but by breaking them when it mattered most. As they paused near Gate 47, Doug looked down at Scarr, who gazed back with those steady, intelligent eyes. "Good boy," Doug said quietly, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything. Because he'd learned something that morning 6 months ago, something that every officer and every handler should know. Sometimes the best security doesn't come from detecting threats, it comes from recognizing when someone needs help, even when they don't know to ask for it. And sometimes that recognition requires trusting a partner who can't speak but knows exactly what to say.
If you love stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Till next time, always remember that there is a hero in every dog.